All right, welcome everybody to the September Canada Wildfire webinar. I'm coming to you from Treaty 6 territory. I live in what is now called Leduc, Alberta. Before we begin, I would like us all to take a moment to think about the places where we live, recreate, work, and the people who held the land before many of us as settlers came. If we could all just take a second for that. Okay, so as I said, my name is Karen Bluen. I am the research coordinator at Canada Wildfire, and I am so happy to see so many people here today. I know it has been a very trying, very long fire season. We've had a somewhat modified webinar schedule so far this year with a few postponements and cancellations. So I feel very grateful to see this many people here today to participate. Today we have two great speakers coming to us from the Canadian Prairies Prescribed Fire Exchange. And they're going to be talking to us about the Grasslands database and some ongoing research occurring there. So we have Roy and Dinyar with us today. And with that, I'm going to hand over the reins to them. Oh, just one more thing, sorry. Before I hand over the reins, I would like to say anyone who has questions, please post them in the chat. I will be monitoring the chat. At the end of the presentations, we'll have an open Q&A. So if you dump your questions in there, I can ask them at the end of the presentation to either Roy or Dinyar, and we'll have a great opportunity for some exchange and dialogue at the end. So thank you, everyone, and over to you, Dinyar.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I am Dinyar, and I get to be the Prescribed Fire Coordinator for the Canadian Prairies Prescribed Fire Exchange. In the past, I've had the privilege of speaking about what we were hoping to do and what we wanted to accomplish when we came together as a group about 2.5 years ago. And so today I get to start by giving you a little bit of an update on what we've been able to accomplish in the first 2 years, why it's so important, and then I'll pass it off to Dr. Roy Vera-Velez, our Prescribed Fire Science Coordinator, who's doing a lot of great work, and we'll be able to present to you on that today as well. So to get things started, I just want to give a quick background about who we are and why it matters. And so we are a collection of organizations, agencies, landowners, fire groups. We recognize that the prairies only exist because fire, grazing, and climate shaped it over thousands of years. And we recognize that in the absence of fire, we're losing those prairies, and that it's important for us to reintroduce those in safe ways, but intentional ways, as a land management and conservation tool. And we're trying to do that and remove the obstacles to do that so that prairies continue to exist in Canada and for future generations. So while we are a relatively new concept in Canada, this is by no means reinventing the wheel. There are 15 prescribed fire exchanges that exist in the United States, and we take a lot of our inspiration from them. They've been really, really helpful partners in giving us the tools and the resources and the ideas that we need to be successful here. And we try to wear as many hats as we can. And they have such a wide range of programming in the States, and we've kind of focused that here into 3 branches. So our branches are first to help conduct fires or put fire on the landscape. So we do that through connecting the dots wherever we can, wherever there's an obstacle. If it's equipment, we have equipment for rental. If it's personnel and trained staff, I think someone's mic might be unmuted. Right on. And so if there's a shortage of personnel, we'll connect the dots with regional partners. If it's equipment, training, whatever it is, we try to reduce those obstacles and help get fire back on the landscape. Second, we have training. So we're happy to help conduct workshops, or if we don't know the answer to something, we'll try and bring in the subject matter experts and help put on workshops or training events for whatever the needs of our partner groups are. We also have a course that we developed with the University of Saskatchewan. So it's an introduction to prescribed fire in the grassland environment course, and it's openly available to anyone and everyone to take. And then finally, our third branch, there's no point doing what we're doing if we don't find ways to share it. And so that's where Roy really comes in with the science communication component. And we're doing that through our database and through our website and whatever else way we can. So why does this matter? Why is this important? A quick statement of the problem. grasslands are one of the most endangered ecosystems in the world, and we're currently living through a global extinction of species. And just as an example of that, we've seen a 70% decline in grasslands birds since 1970. So we've become very, very good at putting out fires. This is also a result of extreme land fragmentation, but that removal of fire has resulted in a huge decline in habitat quality and availability. And then from the wildfire side of things, we're seeing a huge buildup in fuels. Suppression costs are significant. And one thing to point out, especially this year in the worst wildfire year in Canadian history, the cost of grassland and rangeland fires isn't falling to public agency as much as it's falling to rural municipalities, cities, because as most of us know, in Canada especially, grassland is just this big white O1A, O1B section that isn't really the responsibility of in large majority of the public sector. And so we're seeing a lot of these costs fall to community that might not be able to afford it, and also don't necessarily have the trained staff right now, or staff that have access to the training necessary to address these issues. And that's also to say that prescribed fire then hasn't been up until this point one of the mitigating techniques used to address fire problems. But that is just one of many obstacles that exist in the face of reintroducing prescribed fire. There's, of course, the approvals process is inconsistent across different jurisdictions. Insurance, prescribed fire insurance is still, although it's available, it's very much lacking and not that accessible in Canada. The costs are high, and of course, access to training is something that we're still working. Many groups are still working to make more available. And I think one of the biggest problems is that we expect wildfire operations to also take care of all of our prescribed fire needs. We have prescribed fire. Yes, it's a very strong tool for mitigating wildfires, but it's also a very important conservation and land management tool. But we kind of have this expectation that trained type 1s are going to be doing all the prescribed fires across Canada as well, which is, as we're seeing with these longer seasons and drier and hotter seasons, capacity is stretched to the limit with wildfire operations. And it's just really not fair to expect that. It's one of the things that American groups have become very good at. You'll see that the Nature Conservancy is a lead prescribed fire operation. We have Pheasants Forever. A lot of different groups have kind of taken it upon themselves to build up that internal training and then run those programs on their own. So how are we trying to address it, and what are some of the things that we've accomplished in the 2.5 years that we have been going? I don't have the burn stats from our first year, but in the last 2 years with partners, we have put 32 prescribed fires onto the landscape across the 3 prairie provinces, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and we burnt over 2,000 acres. A lot of these fires are happening within urban centers. City of Saskatoon burns a lot, City of Winnipeg, burning with all the partners that we can. This also includes community pastures, ranchers, I guess whoever we can convince at this point in time to start using it, or who we can help to use it, who's already been using it. We do this. One of our biggest tools for getting around the insurance and liability component is that we've had the help of some lawyers to draft some mutual aid agreements and memorandums of understanding, so we can address all of that ahead of time. And so there's official documents in place before we hit that perfect window, and the windows are so short in Canada. And so having those in place has been really, really crucial for us to get people together. Again, that University of Saskatchewan online work at your own pace course, it's $150, and if you can't afford it, we'll pay it for you. So just get in contact with us, and that's one way that we're getting people access to that important first step of training. The introduction component is very similar to the S-131. It's the basic wildland course, but it's more prairie focused, and it doesn't really go into helicopter operations and things like that aren't so applicable to rural municipalities and conservation groups. We also host a good deal of workshops. tailored to the needs of the group, whether it's succession planning or planning to have your first prescribed fire, just how to deal with communication and outreach to different communities. We get to do a lot of guest lectures, which are really wonderful presentations at some events and conferences. And then I think two pillars, or well, I guess the program itself is one big pillar of our program so far has been what's called a TREX event. And so we worked with the Great Plains Fire Science Exchange and the Nature Conservancy in the States to bring up this amazing programming, which is a training exchange event where over a series of a week or 2 weeks, multiple agencies, groups come together. We put fire down on the landscape in kind of a lower pressure, mentored environment. A lot of people get to train in stretch their own kind of limitations and train in new roles that maybe they haven't experienced before, and all working together over a series of days to burn, learn, and then get to use those lessons right away. Because one of the things we see in the non-fire agency world is that you might do a burn in spring, and then you might not think about fire again until the fall or the next spring. And so that sequential burn operation period is just so beneficial. And then, of course, the Grassland Fire Database, which Roy is going to get to chat with you about later. And one page for plugs, just things that we have coming up. So we have the Targeted Grazing and Prescribed Fire Workshop that is being hosted in Saskatoon next week. We're going to be also hosting in October and helping to facilitate, the second Canadian Prairies Treks. So last year we had 40 participants from 11 agencies. Someone's got their microphone unmuted. One thing that we're working on right now to move forward, it's important that we, of course, everyone knows that we kind of reflect on the lessons of the past and learn from them, and then use that to kind of inform a good way forward. And so we're working with a group of elders from 5 linguistic groups across the prairies to develop a traditional fire uses course. And that's also going to be delivered through the University of Saskatchewan, ideally in a micro-credential or an online platform version that's accessible across Canada. So we had an elders gathering. We helped to facilitate an elders gathering back in May. There'll be another one in October in the Saskatoon region in combination with a fire ceremony. Trying to find a way to hear and then respectfully share the messages and stories in a way that can help inform inclusive fire management moving forward. We're also working on an exchange program for land managers. So if you look at somewhere like Kansas, for example, which has over 99% private land ownership, every spring in a 2-week period, over 2 million acres, and that's not an exaggeration, over 2 million acres are burned because they've been able to demonstrate the economic benefits, and it's now become part of the culture. And so prescribed fire is just a way of life down there, and it's something that would be beneficial here in a lot of ways, but how do we get there? And so I can stand up here and tell every landowner across Canada how important prescribed fire is, but there's nothing like seeing it for themselves. And so next spring we're working with one of our American partners, Great Plains Prescribed Fire Exchange, and to send a group of Canadian ranchers down there, and so they can work with ranchers, do some prescribed fires, see how the culture works and what the benefits are. And a few other things we got. So let's get into some pictures and just see what's happening and what effect is happening. So this was the application of prescribed fire to, in that spring, it was about 300 and something acres of private ranch in the Alberta foothills. We helped them to conduct some workshops ahead of time. They came into Saskatoon to attend some of our prescribed fires and work with us, gain some experience, and then they put fire back onto their landscape. And that was in May. And then in August, working with the Foothills Forage and Grazing Corp, we were able to arrange a field day where we rented some school buses. We took as many ranchers from the local area that were interested in being a part of it, and we took them back out to that exact field. And so we didn't really have to talk too much because the field kind of spoke for itself, and the effects. So you can see here in the center, the rancher, the landowner, sorry, kind of speaking about the benefits that he's seen in that season so far. And so those are the kind of things that really have a lot of impact, we found. Obviously, being out there does a lot more than speaking about it. We've seen a lot of collaborative burning. So this is a burn right on the Saskatoon riverbanks. Any burns that we're seeing nowadays, we're seeing at least 3, 4, 5 different agencies coming together to help each other. And we're kind of seeing that cooperative burn, kind of prescribed burn association model developing here in Canada. And so whatever your agencies need, there's something that you'll be able to find by coming to these collaborative burns and helping out. One of the ways that we are helping is that we have, thanks to the Weston Family Foundation, who gave us 5 years of funding, we're able to buy a lot of the equipment and share it with the different groups, reduce that obstacle again for the use of prescribed fire. And also, it's a great way for different groups to test out before they have to buy it themselves. What are the things that they use are most effective in their ecosystem, and how they can move forward. Every spring, we work with some of our different partners to put on spring refreshers, just scrape off that rust from the off season. And so this year, Environment Canada put it on at Last Mountain Lake. And so this was a lot of the different Saskatoon partners coming together and just doing some spring refresher stuff. The type 2 fire test we did this day, the fitness test we did this day, and a different group will host it every year, and we'll just help to facilitate that with our different partners. These are some workshops that we put on with pasture groups, the Association of Manitoba Community Pastures on the top left. We have a site visit to some Saskatchewan pastures in Lowerburn region there. Sask Parks was in attendance. So that's really a significant step forward for those groups and returning fire to the landscape. So this was the Canadian Prairies Treks last year. Again, 40 participants from 11 agencies, 7 burns in 5 days, 243 acres. Just a comfortable, low pressure environment to learn, with a lot of really experienced fire practitioners present. We had 2 trainers coming up from the States, which was really helpful. And we were able to follow that up. Oh, jumped one ahead. We were able to follow that up this spring with the Manitoba Tallgrass Prairie and Aspen Parkland Treks. That was hosted by the Nature Conservancy of Canada, and we helped them to put that on. That was 30 participants, 7 different agencies, 6 burns, and their landscape is so much larger, and we were able to put 360 acres apply fire to 360 acres of land that week. So that was an amazing experience with a whole new group in a completely different ecosystem. And then just looking at some of these sites since those burns, this is the Northeast Swale in Saskatoon region. One of the projects that we're looking at doing is, some of you might be familiar with Konza Prairie. If you read a paper on grassland fire ecology in the last 100 years, it's probably mentioned Konza Prairie. And so they've been conducting so much of the grassland fire research down in the States. And one of the ideas is to actually turn this Northeast Swale, or use the Northeast Swale here that we have in Saskatoon, as kind of a grassland fire research station, kind of being able to measure and then demonstrate the effects of prescribed fire in these drier regions. And this is Wanuskewin Heritage Park. We helped to conduct a prescribed fire last year on this site, and this is the Hanwi Prairie site. It's a site of the Moonlight, I hope I don't get this wrong, the Moonlight dinners. Just a significant historical site, and one of the privileges of our group is that we've been able to help return fire to places where it has been traditionally, and allowing people to do it with current best practices in a safe way. And so You know, with this and in combination with the traditional fire knowledge course, trying to find ways to use, again, the lessons from the past, do it in a respectful and a good way, and then also incorporate those new practices and create a future for an inclusive future for fire management. And with that, I get to pass it off to Roy. He's going to be talking to you a little bit about our website and the database. Grasslandfire.ca is how you can reach us. If you go to the contact us page, it goes an email right to Roy and I. And we'd be happy to answer any questions for you or work with you on any projects that you might have. Again, we have 5 years of funding. We're 2.5 years in. And so we're lucky to be able to come with that and help you if you have some good ideas to share with us. With that, Roy, I will stop sharing my screen and pass it over to you.
You, Ginger. Just wanna figure it out how to put the presentation. Perfect. Okay, can everybody see my screen now?
Yes, we can see the presenter version, or the right version.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dinger. And thank you, everybody, for sticking around. As Dinger mentioned, my name is Roy Veraveles, and I'm happy to be the science coordinator for the Canadian Prairies Prescribed Fire Exchange over this year. And yeah, I guess today, for this second part of the presentation today in this webinar, I'm going to go through what the Grassland Fire Research Database is and how can we use that information for different purposes. And by providing an example of how we use that to analyze the impact of fire on grassland productivity and diversity. And just to highlight that this is a project in collaboration with the Canadian Prairies Prescribed Fire Exchange, the University of Saskatchewan, and Miwasing. Yeah, so I always start with a little bit of context here. And it's always important to remember that grasslands occur everywhere. They are located all over the world. And because of that, they are subjected to a range of different geographical contexts. So they are interacting with disturbances, particularly fire and grazing, as well as with different levels of weather parameters. So just to provide an example of a couple of sites, we have, for instance, the tallgrass prairie in North America, the Gonza prairie here in Kansas, USA. This is a very fire-dependent ecosystem. So they usually conduct fires in between 1 to 3 years in order to maintain that healthy ecosystem. Otherwise, that landscape can easily be taken over by shrubs or, in general, woody species. There are other places, such as in South America, we also have grasslands. And this is an example in Brazil, which is a grassland wetland that they conduct fire, not necessarily to restrict the amount of tree recruitment, but they rather use fire to maintain an adequate levels of plant diversity and species composition. In the case in other places, such as in Europe, in the southern Mediterranean area of France, they have these grasslands ecosystems mostly associated with grazing. And that's the way that they maintain that healthy ecosystem ongoing. So just to provide an example, but my topic today is going to be in relation to fire-dependent grassland ecosystems. And because of that, it's always important to remember 2 aspects of the relationship between grasslands and fire. And the first one is that grasslands plants are resistant to fire. And this, I know probably some of you guys already know about this, but it's important to remember that this coevolution between grassland plants characteristics and fire has happened over the thousands of years of this interaction with fire. And the main characteristic is because is related to the amount of biomass that is located below ground. As you can see here, this is a diagram showing some native grasses species. And it looks like just a very few amount, a small amount of biomass is located above ground. And that is the part that is affected by fire. So it removes this above ground biomass when fire happens, but it barely affects what is located underground. And even so, some reproductive structures are located there. So when fire happens, that allows us to allow grasslands plants to regrowth, more green, more fresh, and more nutritious for animals. So that's one of the key characteristics that is always important to remember about this relationship. And the other important aspect that I consider very important to remember is that grasslands are stable plant communities, but not static. What I mean by that is that if we can see this picture here, this is a mixed grass prairie in southern Saskatchewan. And when we look at the composition here, this plant composition change over time. So in order to provide a theoretical framework of how it looks like and the interaction with this plant community movement with other type of parameters such as disturbances, such as grazing and fire, if we can relate this grassland plant community to this rolling ball here, that represents the movement that it goes back and forth every year. And that movement is pushed based on the level of disturbances, example, fire, grazing, as well as other ecological feedback, negative or positive. And that's the way that these plant communities are moved. And there is also interaction with some weather parameters. And according to this theoretical framework, how deep is this curved line is represented by how the variation of the climate is. So this is the theoretical framework that represents and it shows that grasslands are in fact stable communities, but require periodic disturbances such as fire. But we are facing significant challenges. And specifically talking about two threats, we are having fire suppression and climate change. The both together, they are moving these plant communities into an ecosystem in a transitional state. I'm going to explain that in a little bit, but in terms of climate change, I'm just going to show you some data provided by NASA, how those anomalies are showing up over the last 100 years. And we can see this animation. And so what it looks like here is a temperature anomaly that shows changes over time. And the blue areas represent colder areas, and those yellow and red areas represent changes in those temperature anomalies. What is really interesting here is that in around 1970, those temperature anomalies really start taking off. But most importantly here, you can notice that those temperature anomalies are mostly located in the northern hemisphere. So what we are seeing here is that we are particularly in North America, Europe, Siberia, and other places located in the northern hemisphere are going to face those significant challenges in terms of climate change. So how these climate change issues can affect our grassland ecosystem? So if we can bring back this diagram that I previously showed you about the stable plant community, when we have more temperature anomalies, for example, these weather anomalies are pushing up this curved line, facilitating this rolling ball that represents our stable plant community, and most likely moving into a transitional state, and a stable plant community that might be represented as grassland combined with shrubs as well. So this is a transitional state that we don't know, they can either go into a forest state or they can go back into a grassland herbaceous species. Now, how fire suppression can move this forward is by unbalancing the forces related to those disturbances and ecological feedback. So by pushing this and balancing these forces by fire suppression, we can even move even forward this rolling ball into another type of ecosystem, in this case, most likely forest. And trying to get back to grassland ecosystems again from this state is really, really difficult. So this is something that some of the places are facing today, some of the issues. And here there are a couple of pictures. In this left side, we have a picture taken in Nebraska. So they are having a really big issue with cedar encroachment. They are taking over all this vegetation because of fire suppression and climate change, and most likely climate change as well. And this is another picture in the right that represents aspen encroachment in the tallgrass prairie in Manitoba. So those are examples of how this relationship between fire suppression issues with climate change might affect our grassland ecosystem. Now, here is where we need to think whether we can be reactive to those challenges or be proactive. And by reactive means that we just leave things as they are. So basically, if we don't act against all of those issues, we can always need to react to those wildfires, need to react to those significant issues. Or we can choose to be proactive by, for example, conducting prescribed fires. So in order to maintain a healthy and ecosystem and reduce, for instance, risks of wildfire. So I believe our organization, the Canadian Prairies Prescribed Fire Exchange, is a proactive way to trying to deal with those issues. So, and one of the ways is that sharing fire sciences. So we're trying to answer different all of those questions, trying to conduct those fires in a very correct way. And by doing so, we're working in this project that we call the Grassland Fire Research Database, and that involves two different aspects. First, it involves selecting a relevant bibliography on grassland fire research. And the second part of the Grassland Fire Research Database involves extracting the data from those individual studies. So there are two aspects, that is components that represent our big Grassland Fire Research Database project that might be useful for different fire users. I'm gonna explain later why it is important. So here we have one example of different papers that we have selected that we consider relevant in relation to fire and grazing. In this map here, what I'm showing you is that where are those studies located around the world? Those black dots represent different locations of the studies that we have selected and we consider. In this map shows the different levels of annual precipitation. So we're always trying to look at those correlations between this data with weather parameters as well. This Grassland Fire Database not only incorporates peer-reviewed publications, but also incorporates samples collected across the Canadian prairies. So we're trying to focus our efforts into the Canadian prairies because there are several studies that hasn't been conducted in the Canadian prairies. So we need to fill those gaps in the space, trying to fill those spaces with sample collections. So here I'm showing you some pictures of people that have helped us collecting samples across the Canadian prairies in 2022. I'm talking about Parks Canada, the University of Saskatchewan, Shiloh Army Forces, as well in Manitoba. And this map shows where we collected samples across the Canadian prairies. So these red dots represent sample collections across this area, and as well combined with some paper published in other areas as well, like in British Columbia. So how our Grassland Fire Research Database looks like. So if you go to our website, to the Canadian Prairies Prescribed Fire Exchange website, you will see a tab that says Fire Research. So that's our website. And then you can click there and you can see our posted bibliography. So all of those are what we consider are relevant publications on grassland and fire research. And every individual study has been collected for the metadata as well, included with the metadata, and we are trying to show where these studies are located, what variables we're taking and analyzed, as well as location and different levels of weather parameters and other information, important information as well. And most importantly, we have extracted every single data from these publications, as you can see here. And all this information is going to be available for everybody, so they can use for different purposes. So how do we use this information, and why is this important? Over the last year, we were trying to review all of different studies, and then we realized that there are no quantitative reviews or systematic analysis on those individual studies. So there are several investigations or research about grassland and fire, but there are no quantification of all of these individual studies put together. And that is critical, because understanding those fire effects in a different scales is important to justify the use of prescribed fires, to probably predict or anticipate those fire effects at different scales, either small or large scales, and also trying to determine appropriate fire intervals.
Roy, we seem to have lost your audio. Can anyone else confirm if they've also lost audio?
Yeah, Roy, I wonder if you might need to turn off your video. It seems your internet might be a little bit choppy.
Oh, sure.
And we've lost you for probably about 10 seconds. So I'm not sure if you want to step back for a sec or just continue on from where you are. Okay, I still can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, I'm gonna go back.
Roy, we got to the part where you were talking about fire intervals.
Sorry, say again, Ginger.
You had just mentioned fire intervals, and then we lost you.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, so yeah, so these are the justifications of why we're conducting this meta-analysis, and by using the Grassland Fire Research database. And please stop me anytime if my audio is off again. So yeah, we by using this information, we can analyze different aspects. And just to provide an example of how we can use this information, we conduct an analysis on the impact on fire on grasslands productivity and diversity. And just to show you again, where are those studies located based on different weather parameters, here we have the mean annual temperature around the globe. And then we're going to start showing some of the results of this analysis. So here, we can start looking at some of the results by using this Grassland Fire Research database. Something interesting that we need several questions that we can ask here is, for example, what is the relationship of the grassland biomass and grassland productivity and diversity response to fire in relation to weather parameters? So that's why we analyze these two relationships, as we can see here in these figures. So grassland biomass represents productivity against precipitation and temperature as well. And what we can find here so far is that, in general, grassland biomass is more sensitive than plant diversity to these weather parameters in response to fire. So grassland biomass responds more significantly than with precipitation than temperature as well. And what we can see here, for example, is that in terms of, there are some, in this figure, because this is a meta-analysis, we make some calculations. And what you can see here, there are these black dots represent every single study that the information was extracted. And in this line, you can see the zero line. So when this individual study falls above the zero line, that represents a positive effect. But when the individual study falls below that zero line, that represents a negative effect. So you can see here that there are several studies that fall under a positive effect and a negative effect as well. But in general, that what the trend looks like is is a significant nonlinear relationship with precipitation, for example. And then we can determine and predict some of the results here by conducting fire in terms of productivity. For example, if we conduct fires in areas where we have precipitation levels below 400 millimeters per year, we might expect a negative response in terms of productivity. But if we conduct fires in areas where we have precipitation levels in between 500 to 1,000 millimeters per year, we might have an outcome of positive result. Similarly, with temperature in terms of productivity, we have this non-significant linear relationship. And same here, we have areas where we conduct fires and the temperature in the environment is less than 10 degrees Celsius. And most likely, we will have results, negative results. But conducting fires in between 10 degrees and 20 degrees, it looks like we can expect a positive result. And just so you know that these results show at a global scale. So how can we compare with the Canada prairies? So this is a result only for the Canadian prairies, and the range for the precipitation levels go no more than 400 or 500 millimeters per year. So it's located right in this range of the response. So mostly we could expect for the Canadian prairies, by conducting prescribed fires, we can expect most likely a negative response in terms of productivity. What about comparing with temperatures? That's the same case for the Canadian prairies, which is this figure here. You can see that most of the responses, which is located in that range at a global scale, might represent a negative response by conducting fire in terms of productivity. Now, this figure here shows the diversity response really in relation to weather parameters, precipitation, and temperature. And we can see as well that compared to biomass response, this nonlinear relationship is less significant. So especially with temperature, as we can see, but we definitely can see some of the results in terms of diversity, particularly showing some positive in between 400 and 1,000 millimeters per year for diversity levels. And for temperature, it seems like most of the responses are fairly positive. Yeah, so other questions that we can ask and we can answer by using this Grassland Fire Research database is, for example, how long those fire effects last. So if we conduct fire, how long those effects can still produce some positive or negative responses. So we conduct this analysis in terms of productivity, and it looks like there is a steady trend right above the 0 line, which represents a positive response. But it looks like at year 7 or 8, there is a significant decline in the response. So it looks like when we conduct fires, those effects last for around 7 or 8 years. And that is a global trend. And same thing for diversity. So we can see that those fire effects on diversity level are mostly positive for the first 6 or 7 years and then start to decline again. So this can give us an idea of what would be the most appropriate fire intervals in order to maintain those positive responses in the landscape. We have other types of examples that we can use for our Grassland Fire Research database. And so we divided our data in studies that have conducted fires on an annual basis, on a 2-year basis, every 4 years and every 5 years, to see how fire frequencies affect productivity and diversity. What it looks like in terms of plant productivity or biomass, there is a neutral effect. So almost no positive or negative responses. It looks like there is a little bit of negative trend here by conducting fires every 5 years, but there is no significance. So statistically speaking, it's mostly neutral. However, when we are looking at the diversity levels and conducting fires in a different fire regimes, different fire frequencies, it looks like every 5 years, we have a very significant and positive response on plant diversity. So if we think about ecological restoration and using fire as one of the management tools, perhaps conducting longer fire intervals may result with a better positive response. Do you still hear me okay?
Yes, we do.
Thank you, Dinger. Okay, there are other aspects that we have analyzed with this Grassland Fire Research database, and something interesting that we come up with this is analyzing the responses of grasslands to fire in terms of productivity and diversity by ecosystem type. And what we can see here is that by conducting fires in aspen parklands and mixed grass prairies, the responses are mostly neutral, a little bit negative, but not significantly speaking. But it's interesting that conducting fires in a tall grass prairie, most of the responses are really positive. And that is mostly related to the precipitation levels that are located in these areas here. So the more we have precipitation levels, the more the positive response of grasslands to fire. Same here, we have in terms of plant diversity, we have mostly a neutral response in aspen parklands and mixed grass prairies. And it's interesting that in the tall grass prairie, there is a neutral effect, trend to be a negative response in terms of plant diversity, but we have a significant and positive responses on oak savannas. So that is something interesting that we have found in this analysis. And another interesting aspect that we can also use our Grassland Fire Research database is to determine whether grazing, incorporating together with fire can produce a negative or positive effect. And what we found here is that by conducting fires, the response of grassland biomass and diversity and incorporating grazing as well is producing not a very clear response. So what is showing us, so this is the N represents no grazing and the Y represents yes. So that means grazing, and same here for plant diversity. So what is telling us that even though if we conduct fires and we put the land into graze right away, most likely the effect will be no negative. And yeah, so so I think this is what our results are showing, that grazing is not producing a very significant effect even after conducting fires. Yeah, so just to wrap up here, I'm showing some of the pictures of the tall grass prairie. This picture shows the tall grass prairie in Kansas. And so based on the information that we have here, we can say that conducting fires on a regular basis, at very short intervals, we can have a very, very positive effect on productivity and diversity. And that's most likely because of those annual precipitation levels which they have in between 400 and 900 millimeters per year, which is located in the range of the positive response. So this is another picture of the Manitoba tallgrass prairie with a regular fire applications, and it looks like there is a very all these shrubs are very under control. And this is another picture of the mixed grass prairie, which the annual precipitation level is less than 300 millimeters. And as we showed the analysis here, it shows that there is a negative effect on productivity under these conditions. But we can maintain plant diversity if we conduct fires in a long intervals. So we may need to conduct fires to maintain adequate levels of biodiversity here. Yes, I think that's all I have. I'm showing again our website for the Canadian Prairies Prescribed Fire Exchange. Everybody is welcome to join us and to ask questions. And so that's the website. And just to give some acknowledge of people that have been critically involved in this project, from the University of Saskatchewan, we have a Grassland National Park, CFB Shiloh in Manitoba, the government of Manitoba, and some other agencies as well, and particularly to the funding agencies, to the Weston Family Foundation and MyTax, who have provided support, financial support here. And I think that's all I have. So I guess we have time for questions. I'll be happy to take any.
Thank you so much, Roy. And thank you everyone for your patience with our slight technical difficulties. Super interesting. Thank you so much for coming, both of you. I personally learned a lot, and it really had my creative juices flowing here thinking, I live in a municipality, so I've been chatting with a lot of friends I have that are on our local fire department, whether full-time employed or volunteer based, and a lot of the discussions that we've had, because they know my background, have been around the spring fires and how we had so many emergency alerts. So I'm talking Alberta centric. This is where I'm located this spring, and a lot in places that we typically don't have them. And a lot of what I heard from these individuals on the various fire departments is how nerve-wracking it is for them in some ways, because they don't have the experience working with wildland fire or grass fire, or necessarily even the equipment. They're showing up to these incidents in, full turnout gear, and really realizing now that something like cross-training could be such a valuable resource. So I found this very informative from that lens, and will definitely be taking some of these notes and passing on contact information to people in my area. So with that said, I see a couple questions in the chat. If anyone else has questions, please post them in there and I will read them out. Dinier, did you have anything you wanted to address before I get to the questions?
Just speaking to your point, it wasn't so much a question, but we are finding that a lot of fire departments are joining us on prescribed fire as a training exercise. And that includes large fire departments like the Saskatoon Fire Department, who have, bush buggies and like the really high quality equipment to fight wildfires, but they're just not getting the experience is a poor way of putting it, but there's just not that many grass fires that all their crews are getting to practice on them for when the actual incident would happen. And so coming in as suppression units for prescribed fires is a really great way to train. And also it helps with things like backing fires and setting intentional fires to stop wildfires. So those are practices that also are really useful and that can be practiced in a safer environment in a prescribed fire world.
Yeah, that's great. And also just those opportunities for relationship building between different groups, right? Just such a key thing. So our first question here, I live in Kansas and work with the U.S. Department of Commerce and NASA on fire management, prevention, containment, and post-fire management. Does your database contain some of the fire management parameters, and is it accessible to the public?
Sounds like a Roy.
Yes, yes, that's a question for me. I'm going to start with this database will be accessible to the public. So everything will be accessible. Right now, we are wrapping up with including additional information on latest published papers, as well as some latest samples that we have collected during this year. And everything will be uploaded into the website in this fall, so everybody will have access to that. And in terms of what fire parameters do we have in our Grassland fire database? Well, we have a couple of them in terms of burn frequency, for example. All of those studies that have conducted in different fire regimes, such as annual basis, single fires, or every 2 years, every 5 years. We have also some other parameters, such as what type of where are located, the latitude and longitude on those different studies, as well as what is the representation of the levels of the responses in terms of grasslands, specifically to biomass and diversity for now. But we are planning to incorporate during this year and next year other parameters such as litter composition, which represents dead standing biomass, as well as some other parameters such as forage quality and in relation to how fire affects that. So that's basically what our database parameters is incorporated, and it will be accessible to the public.
One thing just to add to that is I see that Carolyn has joined us on the call. So great to see your name on there, Carolyn. But the Great Plains Fire Science Exchange is based out of Kansas State University, and they're an amazing resource for all things fire, where you are as well, Roger. So I would encourage you to reach out to Carolyn Baldwin at the Great Plains Fire Science Exchange there as well.
Great, thank you. So our next question, I'm curious if there is any research on prescribed fire in combination with other measures, such as removing woody material or invasive plants prior to the prescribed burn.
Yes, there are many. Especially in the United States, there are a bunch of studies that have been conducted into testing different approaches to reduce materials such as shrub encroachment and other aspects in grasslands. Invasive species as well has been, there are some studies showing that conducting fires, for example, is not the only tool that can be manage all invasive species, but rather a combination of different measures can be more effective way for reduce invasive species. But those research hasn't been incorporated into our grassland research database yet, but eventually we'll do that as well.
Thank you. So the next question is addressed to you, Roy. In your 2023 manuscript, will there be applicability of the review to future climate conditions in aspen parkland, for example? Many areas will lose aspen while grasslands expand in future hotter, drier conditions.
Yes, so that's one of the potential goals we are trying to achieve. So this is a great tool that we can use to predict those outcomes. So since that we have a very high nonlinear relationship with those weather parameters, particularly precipitation, we can start using this as a model to start predicting those outcomes and maybe trying to model those conditions for future climate change conditions. And that could be adapted to other type of weather parameters such as temperature, since we also find significant relationship as well. And we can divide that into different ecosystem types, as long as we have enough information. So I think that's something very highly applicable in our research database.
Thank you. We've got lots of questions coming in now. This is great. So the next one is taking more of a look at the fire side of the database. So will your database include fire description parameters? Often fires are treated as all being the same when they are actually a wide diversity of types of fire and therefore types of fire effects.
Well, for now, we are only treating them as when this fire has started. Some of the fires have been conducted in the spring, some of them have been conducted in the fall, and some of them during the summer. So for now, we are just treating them as one single fire per year. But if we can incorporate those categories into the different models, that's something doable. However, we need to incorporate lots of information in order to make this model reliable. So there are probably just few examples of fires conducted in the spring. So we cannot use that data yet because it's not enough. So we need to still work on those to make our model more reliable.
Okay, so if I were just to further this question, would there be plans in the future to include something like a fire behavior description or a fire severity analysis post-fire? Or is that kind of outside of the scope of this?
That's probably out of the scope, but that's something that can be incorporated perhaps with other. There are some students working right now on determining fire severity by using proxies as, for example, dead standing biomass. in the University of Saskatchewan. And those studies can be also located into the Grassland Fire Research Database. But our Grassland Research Database does not incorporate that information yet. So that's basically out of scope.
Perfect, thank you. So you actually segued really good to this next question, which gets at biomass. First of all, they say thank you for the interesting presentation. Can you add some details on where you get the biomass and diversity data? Are they from ground sampling, satellites, etc.? And how will the data quality affect your conclusions?
Absolutely. So all these papers published were selected based on the fact that they have collected ground vegetation. And most of these publications have been conducted over the last 50 years, probably, in different places around the world. And all of them have conducted ground collection of biomass, diversity, and all of those are field samples collections. So yeah, that's what I'm gonna say.
Thank you. So this next question kind of goes back to Dinyar's presentation. What is the permitting process like for prescribed burns? So I know you talked about how you get all your ducks in a row ahead of time. And I had a very similar question actually as this I was going to ask, but this person would like to know what the process is like. And is it similar to just a general fire permit that is required, or is there more to the process?
Sure, it's an important question and it's really circumstantial. So unfortunately, across the prairies, there is no blanket answer to this. It's really dependent on your local jurisdiction. And so as an example, in Saskatoon, we need to get the permission of the local fire department. So whether we're burning in the RM outside of Saskatoon or in the city itself, you'll go to the fire department there, submit your burn plan, and it's a matter of if there's a burn ban on, it's always a no. If there's no burn ban and they like to look at your plan, it helps that we have a record of safe burning here. You know, Meewasin, the organization that houses our group, they've been burning for, 30, 40 years. And so that really helps. But in a lot of different areas, we're seeing that just conversations with your fire department on how the approvals work there. If you are burning, now all of that is completely out the window if you're burning next to Crown land. When you're burning near Crown land, you need to be going through the provincial avenues for approval. So in Manitoba, I know they just have a toll-free line that you can call and ask about the process. As far as I know, everyone will ask for a burn plan. We have free templates on our website for burn plans, go, no-go sheets. Roy has developed a monitoring protocol, or is currently in the process of developing a monitoring protocol. So also, if you're trying to measure effects, if there's anything that is not addressed in one of our templates, you're welcome to reach out to us and we can help you. But yeah, write the burn plan, get in touch with your local fire department, find out what the approval process is in your area. And then at that point in time, if there's still hesitation because it's just not something that existed in your region for a long time, we'd be super happy to help facilitate a workshop regionally, just to bring in relevant stakeholders and talk about what a prescribed fire would entail, and how to start planning those.
Great. That makes me really happy to hear that there's some templates available. That was actually my next question that I have personally. So what a great resource. And it sounds like you guys are just so willing to support different people in this endeavor. So that's really great. The next question is from someone within an agency. So how do you want agencies to provide GIS fire data to the database? I'm guessing we want both planned and unplanned fire data included.
That is a really great question. And we'll be happy if you can reach out to us so then we can incorporate that data into the website. And so that will be the mechanism right now. So we don't have still a mechanism to everybody to get into the website yet. But for now, I think you can reach out to us and then we can incorporate that information. So the idea here is to present this Grassland Fire database and to keep incorporating and updating that information and coming from different agencies. That is really significant.
I think it's important. Thank you, Roy. I think it's really important what you just said, that it's a live document and that it's constantly growing. And you'd mentioned in your presentation that, you know, we chose these papers because they were the most relevant, but it was the most relevant at the time for productivity. And now we'll be looking at something else, you know, forage quality or whatever it be. And this will constantly be expanding. And also if you have some of your own papers or you've noticed some key papers that you think should be on there, please reach out to us. There's only so many hours in the day, and Roy is only one man, but it's growing, and we'd love for that help.
Excellent. I just put the link to the resources page on your website in the chat for anyone who's interested. While I'm chatting, Dinyar and Roy, did you want to put your contact info in the chat box for those that might be interested in reaching out?
Sure, yeah.
So the next question is, have there been any considerations or appetite for the inclusion of BC into the Canadian Prairies Prescribed Fire Exchange, acknowledging that grasslands make up less than 1% of the province?
We are open to everybody. Sorry, Dinyar, you saying?
Oh, I was just going to finish writing my email address before I address that one. But yes, we are open to having conversations and helping in the ways that we can, and events like our treks and things like that are open to across Canada and the States as well. Fortunately, whatever it is, it's that we're afraid that if we get too big, then we become less impactful. And so we are the Canadian Prairies Prescribed Fire Exchange, but what we want to see in time is just like in the States, that network of prescribed fire exchanges addressing their own ecosystems across Canada. And that could be multiple exchanges in any given province. We'd be really happy to help, you know, consult on how that process could go. But in terms of having an established presence in BC, those groups are always welcome to join us on our fires and gain that knowledge and take it back. But it's really hard for us to be present across all of Canada.
Great. The next question is about tracks.
Sorry.
So, oh, sorry, did someone? Okay, the next question is about treks. So they'd like to know if the treks events are open to the public or only employees of agencies to attend.
It definitely depends on the event. Speaking to the one in Saskatoon last year, it was an open event. I think because of insurance reasons, this year we might have to limit it to agencies and established organizations. But we are looking to address that insurance issue. But I know that the ones in the States, so there's a website, Conservation Gateway, it's the Nature Conservancy's website, and they post upcoming treks. And there are always 3 or 4 or 5 up there. Each will have their own requirements and limitations and speak to their own ecosystem. So if you're in a more forested environment or that's something of interest to you, there is an event for you. And if you just reach out to their coordinators, they'll always be able to answer who and how you can attend.
I'm just also going to plug that W-Treks came to Canada for the first time. So that's for women in fire, which is great that we're getting it up here now. So the next one is more of a comment, but I think it could be a good discussion point. So it seems that in Alberta, at least, that every time we have a major wildfire event, for example, Slave Lake, Fort McMurray, the permitting for prescribed burning becomes more and more difficult. Complete with blanket fire bans moving earlier into the spring, municipalities can set their own restrictions, but they often tend to follow provincial cues.
Yeah, and I think that goes both ways. It's about the culture and then perception. But one of the things that's really interesting is that not that many years ago, there weren't clear prescribed fire protocols and laws in the United States. And if I'm not mistaken, what happened was that the right document was in the right hands at the right time. And so Florida had an exceptionally bad fire year. And it just happened that the governor of Florida at the time had some exposure to the background of prescribed fire. There was a prescribed fire act on their desk, and it was just the right time to put that forward. And that served as kind of the precedence for the rest of the country. And now most states have an established prescribed fire act, which clearly outlines the liability and protocol for getting prescribed fire into practice in that state. And so I think what we want to do here too is just make sure that the ducks are in a row for when the right opportunity comes, and when finally there's that acknowledgement. You know, you're seeing it all over the news, no matter what you pick up or read and how you absorb your news. It's the importance for more prescribed fire, looking at traditional cultural practices, the use of prescribed fire and its mitigating factors, and it's only a matter of time until it gets to a decision maker that they can't ignore it anymore. When landowners come together and go to the ministry bag and say, hey, enough is enough. We're losing pasture year over year to woody shrub encroachment. Where we have wildfires, we're seeing the best grazing done. We need action. And at that time, we're going to make sure, and with your help, we're going to make sure that we have documents and things in place to get that move forward, and then get ourselves prescribed fire acts in Saskatchewan, Alberta, Manitoba, wherever else we can.
Great, thank you. This one's just a general question for me. Yes, this presentation is being recorded. It will be posted on our YouTube channel at Canada Wildfire. I'll probably get it up early next week. And please, if you would like to share it through your network, that would be great. So does anyone else have any questions for our speakers? Oh, here's one. Given the combination of fire suppression and climate change, do you have any input on recommended fuel breaks in grasslands, especially in extreme conditions?
Yeah, of course. First and foremost, I think it's not possible to give direct recommendations on any fire breaks without seeing the site and having boots on the ground. I do think the course is a really good first step to understanding the importance of fire breaks and what considerations go into them. I hesitate to give any generalizations here because I don't want this to be like, that's all you need for your prescribed fire. But some of the things that we teach are making sure that it's wide enough to be used as a transportation pathway. So making sure a full trucking unit can go there. If it's butted up against a fence, you want to make sure that given any wind condition, you're not going to have crews stuck between fences and fuel on a fire break. You know, for last year's treks, just because it was a teaching event and we wanted to make sure it was as safe as possible, we were asking for 4 to 5 meter fire breaks, and that was just in knee to waist high fuel. But really, it's so dependent on where you are. It's dependent on the fuel on the other side, the consequences of the risk of an escape, and then experience level of crews is also crucial. As you get more experienced, you'll know better how you can prepare your burns for what you can expect.
Yeah, I think you make a great I think you make a great point, Dinger, that probably participating in the introduction to prescribed fire course give you a really good knowledge on what are the right conditions for a wildfire to start, and especially when this fuel build up is growing, and more especially when these extreme conditions on humidity and temperature are having these anomalies, may have a big risk of wildfires to happen. So by attending or having some knowledge on what are the right conditions, it is important here.
Yeah, and actually, it might be worth mentioning too that while the indices system that's used by fire programs across Canada is an amazing system, it doesn't always apply and carry over to writing prescriptions for the environments that we work in, because, you know, figuring out what your fine fuel moisture code is in any given area at any specific time requires you to be tracking it all season long, so that by September you have a very accurate account of what you can expect. And that's not always possible for a landowner, a pasture, a conservation group. And so we go about it a different way, and we don't specifically use Red Book and Yellow Book to make these kind of recommendations. And that's very consistent with a lot of the ways that prescribed burn associations and other communities are doing it. But it's just to say that even if you do have a good fire background, I think the perspective added through this approach and through the course is a good one.
Perfect. I was just trying to find the link to the yellow book or the grass book in case anyone didn't have it, but I wasn't quick enough. The next question is, does the database incorporate traditional ecological knowledge of Indigenous groups? There was mention of an upcoming University of Saskatchewan course, but I'm curious if there are plans to incorporate traditional ecological knowledge directly into the database.
Hey, Roy, this will be a question for you, but I think mentioning the OCAP would be really relevant.
No, absolutely. I think for now, we are not planning to incorporate our traditional ecological knowledge into the database. And for a couple of reasons. First, we are trying to, we are working on developing this traditional fire use course with the University of Saskatchewan. And by doing that, we need to do it in a respectful way by asking permission to the knowledge keepers in this case. And by following OCAP principles, I think that's a critical and essential part of sharing that information. So for now, we're not using that information and making it available to the public by using our research database to incorporate this traditional fire knowledge or traditional ecological knowledge directly into our database. Yeah. So for now, no. I think that's the short answer. But eventually, if we have the right conditions and all the following the OCAP principles, maybe we can think about incorporating this information as well.
And just briefly, the OCAP principles is talking about ownership, control, access, and possession of knowledge that's not ours. And so the traditional way of sharing knowledge is, you know, as an example, a university would write a course, it would own all the material and then get to share it. And the idea here is that no one owns that material and that knowledge. And even if it was shared with us, it wasn't necessarily meant for the purposes of profiteering or sharing it without permission every single time. So navigating those waters to make sure that we're being better about it. And there's a long way to go before we know how to just share that on our website.
Great. Yeah, I think that's really important to acknowledge as well. And acknowledging that just because knowledge is shared with you directly doesn't mean it's with the all, like they're not just saying that you can share it widely as well too. So that's the last question so far. I'll give a couple minutes here if anyone has a couple more they'd like to add. We do have, I think, 11 minutes left before our scheduled end time. While we wait, thank you both very much. It was really great, very informative, and I think a lot of people learned a lot about your organization and the database, which is a huge endeavor. It's actually quite impressive how much has gotten done. So kudos over there. Okay, I see one more here. Sorry, I'm squinting. I have a tiny chat box. Where do you see insurance and liability for prescribed burners going in the future? Is there any hope for individual land managers getting covered?
Oh, Barry, you almost let me get away without having to talk about insurance. It's for sure the most limiting factor for the wide use of prescribed fire in Canada. Prescribed fire, I mentioned earlier that it's available, but as an example, our organization specifically for prescribed fire pays about $20,000 a year for insurance. And so it is completely cost prohibitive for a lot of groups. Depending on your organization and the way you're using prescribed fire, it's easier or more difficult to get. One thing I'll say is that in the United States, within the last 3 years, there have been several more insurance opportunities become available, and groups are now focusing on prescribed fire and helping landowners and conservation groups get prescribed fire insurance. And so if it's there now, it's only a matter of time before it comes here. These are conversations that it's one of our primary mandates is to help bring accessible prescribed fire insurance to Canada. And so we are having the conversation actively. recently, there was one group that was interested in exploring the Canadian market. We just weren't able to demonstrate sufficient buy-in for it to get here. But that's to say that the conversation is happening. And again, I think right now it's a matter of getting the ducks in a row so that as soon as that's here, we have the trained personnel to keep it going. But yes, we're working on it. We're open to any and all suggestions. It is a very difficult world to navigate. And to be honest, I'm just so scared of talking to lawyers because they're so expensive for every single question. And so if you have suggestions, we're happy to pursue that with you.
Great, thank you. Okay, I haven't seen any other questions come in, so I'm going to say I think that's all. Thank you both of you for being here. Thank you everyone who attended and all of you who stuck around for this awesome discussion and Q&A at the end. Do you have any last things that you would like to say, Roy or Dinyar?
Well, just saying thank you for attending this presentation, and I think we provided our email addresses. So if anyone wants to reach out, please do so, and we'll be happy to be in contact.
Definitely, and we're happy to present with you for you as well if that's something that your organization could find useful for your stakeholders.
Perfect. And I also put our Canada Wildfire general email there, wildfire@ualberta.ca. So if anyone has questions that come in after, feel free to send them there and we will make sure they get answered. So thank you everyone for joining. I hope you all have a wonderful Friday and a great weekend and stay safe out there.